We went today by the Captain Paris clinic on the lake. You just pull up.
Yeah, right.
There are other ones.
That's all we used to get in the
Get Kevin on board here. We'll start the meeting. Politicking over there.
Oh, yeah.
But at least you didn't get force. I had a conversation with my apparently
I'll call to order the February 21st regular meeting of the Lake Charles Harbor and Terminal District. If everyone would please stand. Dear Lord, we ask your blessing on this board, this port, the people who depend upon it. We ask you guide us in our decisions, that they are for the good of those that we serve. Amen.
Amen.
Mr. Guidry, if you lead us in.
And we'll face the flag, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The board encourages public comments and questions regarding all agenda items. Persons wishing to do so should complete a speaker's card, which is at the entrance to the boardroom. When speaking or asking a question on an agenda item, one should, in addition to completing the card, come to the microphone, be recognized, provide your name, address, and phone number. Comments by individuals will be limited to 3 minutes. First item is the approval of the January 24th regular meeting minutes.
Mr. President, I'll move the adoption of the
Second.
minutes.
Mr. Lorenzi moves. Mr. Guidry second. Any discussion, corrections? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion carried. First submission, submission 2022-04. Mr. Self.
Yes, staff requests the Board of Commissioners to accept the bid of Lard Oil to supply motor fuel for vehicles and equipment use, and further authorize Executive Director Richard Self to execute all documents therewith. The port requested bids for fuel. Lard was the only respondent. They quoted a rate of 0.0875 over index for unleaded fuel. For off-road diesel, they quoted 0.072, and for diesel, they quoted 0.20. Those rates above the index were unchanged from 2021. The bid is for the supply of fuel for a 1-year period.
I would move approval of submission 2022-004.
I'll second.
Ms. McCleary moves. Mr. Lorenzi second. Any discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All
Aye.
opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion carried. Submission 2022-05. Mr. Self.
Board approval is sought to enter into a cooperative endeavor agreement with the Diocese of Lake Charles regarding the provision of a vessel services at the Port of Lake Charles. Basically, what the port purchased a Ford Expedition a few years ago. I think it was maybe last year. The van has been sitting here idle. The Seafarer Center, who provides great services to not only vessels that call on the port, but on vessels that call throughout the channel, they bring them to doctor's appointments. They've even brought some of the seafarers to get vaccinated. They bring them to Walmart, Best Buy, Target, things like that. They're very interested in utilizing the van for those services. And because of the benefit they provide the seafarers at the port, we're interested in entering into the CEA with them.
Mr. President, I make a motion to approve submission 2022-005.
Mr. Darbone moved. Mr. Guidry seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion carried.
Wait, I do have one question. John, Does this affect in any way the insurance coverage on this?
No, they'll be required to have insurance on it. We're
They
gonna
have to
transfer
cover-
title to them of the
okay.
van. They'll own it, right?
All right,
And
thank
then
you.
through the CEA, they'll promise or, contract to use that van for the services of the Port of Lake Charles.
And
It'll be theirs.
will be an additional insured?
Yeah, well, yeah, the CEA requires them to identify us and all that.
Thank you.
Submission 2022-06. Mr. Self.
Staff requests the Board of Commissioners to authorize the Executive Director to enter into a professional services agreement with Lanier and Associates for design services to rehab the calcine dust collectors and feeders at BT1. The Port requested SOQs for the design services to rehab the calcine dust collectors and the feeders at BT1. The calcine loaders, the calcine coke we handle for Phillips 66. The existing system is beyond its useful life and needs to be replaced. Lanier was, I believe, the only engineer that responded to the SOQ after advertising at a cost of $240,000 plus a $10,000 contingency.
I have a motion.
Mr. President, I'll move the adoption of submission 2022-006.
I would second that.
Mr. Lorenzi moves, Ms. McClary second. Any discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion carried. Submission 2022-07, Mr. Self.
Sure. Staff requests the Board of Commissioners to authorize the Executive Director to accept the lowest responsive bid from Keelan Construction LLC for the purchase and installation of a 60,000 square foot tension fabric building to be located in City Docks, subject to approval of the Executive Director and General Counsel, that all appropriate conditions have been met and all requirements of the proposal documents have been met, and further authorizing the Executive Director to execute all documents therewith. As you guys are very familiar, we lost a third of our linear feet of dock space and about 25% of our covered storage when we lost train shed 4, 5, and 6. This tension fabric building will be located on the container pad, 60,000 square feet, and it'll be an interim solution for covered storage to handle cargo at City Docks. And the estimated cost is $1.4 million, almost $1.5 million, plus a $300,000 contingency for a total of $1,797,000.
Let's have a motion and then we'll
Okay.
take discussion.
Mr. President, I'll move adoption of 2022-007.
Mr. Lorenzi moves adoption. Second. Second by Mr. Prudham. Discussion. Ms. McClary.
So, Nick, there was more than one bid on this?
Yes, ma'am.
But the basis for the decision was strictly based on low bid?
Yes, ma'am. This was a public bid, so we had to go with the low bid.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Nick, I had a question on the contingency part of it. Isn't that contingency a little greater than you typically put in your other contracts?
Yes, sir, and that was purely because it came in lower than expected. We had budgeted $2 million. Todd and I and staff discussed, and we thought maybe we could go for some additional protection, forklift protection for the walls and everything. Since we had the extra funds in there, we would build in a little bit more contingency in case we wanted to pursue change orders to provide
Through change
concrete
order,
protection.
you may increase.
Yes, sir. That's all.
Any other questions?
So what was the next bid?
I believe it was about 400,000 more than that. 1.8, I think, is what it was. I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. But it was around 1.8, about 400,000 more. And then the next two, I think, were much, much higher than that.
Any other questions?
And just to clarify, I did speak to the contractor, and I'm confident in their number, and they're confident in their number, more importantly. So,
Without the contingency?
yes, ma'am.
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion carried. Submission 2022-008, Mr. Self.
Yes, sir. Staff requests the Board of Commissioners to accept the lowest responsive bid and enter into a contract with Scott Equipment for the procurement of a Tadano GR 800 XL4 80-ton capacity crane for BT1, subject to approval of the Executive Director and the General Counsel that all appropriate conditions have been met and all requirements of the proposal documents have been met, and further authorizing the Executive Director to execute all documents therewith. In January, we issued bids for actually 2 cranes. In January, we issued 2 bids. Scott Equipment was the only respondent. They responded on the 80-ton crane at a cost of $718,000. They also responded on the smaller crane, but it had a 22-month lead time. And for that reason, we chose not to go with the smaller crane. This larger crane is going to be used to BT1 primarily to remove, for maintenance purposes, but also to remove lids as we're working barges at BT1. The existing 60-ton crane that's at BT1 will be moved to city docks and utilized here.
Is there any lead time on this crane?
Now, I think it was available.
It is available. It's on site. We actually were able to send our personnel over to look at it and look at the controls and everything.
Okay, do I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve 2022-008.
Okay, Mr. Carbone moves.
I'll second.
Mr. Lorenzi second. Any questions, discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion carried. January 2022 financial briefing note. Cameron?
Yes, sir. For the month ended January 31st, 2022, the port generated revenues of around $3.7 million, which was $300,000 favorable. So we saw higher bay rate, higher calcine, and as mentioned at our last meeting, we saw an inflow of new lumber products. Offsetting that was lower than expected petroleum coke. Expenses were $2.5 million, which was still $100,000 favorable. That's just due to timing of some of our maintenance projects and then offset by continuing hurricane expenses. Depreciation was $1.2 million, which was slightly favorable. Non-operating revenues and expenses generated an expense of $2.2 million. That's primarily due to the port's portion of the P3. EBITDA was $1.2 million, and we generated a cash flow loss of $1.1 million. Again, that's primarily due to our payment of the P3. On the balance sheet, we saw unrestricted cash and investments decrease 1.7. Again, hurricane payments, our payment of the P3. We had our insurance premiums paid in January, and that was partially offset by some funds we received for the ad valorem tax collection. Restricted cash went up $800,000, again due to the P3. Other current assets went up due to the payment of our insurance premiums. Construction in progress and fixed assets both went up due to the completion of some projects and the ongoing hurricane-related projects. Current liabilities went up due to the funds we're holding on behalf of the P3, and long-term debt went down $1.2 million because of the principal payment on our debts. In the financials, we constantly hear about our hurricane-related expenses. I had a request from one of the board members to go into a little more detail. So in January, our hurricane-related expenses were roughly $1.1 million. The majority of that related to, we had shed 16 and 17 roof repairs. We had some permitting, engineering, and designing for berth 4, 5, and 6. We had some testing and inspection on the spiral vary rehab, and we had multiple invoices for project management, which were actually for months in 2021 relating to November, December, or October, November, December. Those were the primary expenses. Any questions?
Questions?
So, if I can ask a question. So, Cameron, where you're, in your report where you talk about expenses, partially offsetting the favorable variance were multiple hurricane-related expenditures. So that's that $1.1 million that you just referenced?
Yes, ma'am.
Administration, Finance and Security.
Yes, sir. So, more FEMA hurricane-related things. I gave y'all the handout that we normally provide for y'all, and what I'm about to go over is actually, you can see kind of a breakdown of that on the right side towards the bottom. So, in total, projects that have gone fully through FEMA process total about approximately 32.3 million. Insurance deductions from that is around 18.9 million, leaving our eligible obligated amount, which is the amount we'll see in GOSEP, is about 13.4. Our 90% share of that would be 12.1. So we've actually submitted to receive roughly 6.8 million of that, and we're only able to request reimbursement on projects that are obligated and that we've spent money on. So relating to the obligated projects, we've spent 8.9 million just on the projects that have been obligated. So in reality, we've submitted 6.8 million to be reimbursed on 8.9. So we've submitted for over 75% of that. So, any questions on any of that? Does that make sense to everyone?
So.
Go ahead.
To be clear,
No, go ahead.
So the federal cost share number, this 12.1 million,
Yes, ma'am.
that, if
So of
that's
that-
what we assume FEMA owes us as
Yes,
of
ma'am.
today.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And we have, of that amount,
We've spent 8.9 million.
we've spent
So-
8.9.
Correct.
And we have submitted requests for 6.8.
Roughly. Yes, ma'am.
So where's the $2 million difference?
Between the 6.8 and the 8.9, that we're actually working on the requests for reimbursement for the rest of that. So the 6.8 is based on some of the larger projects that we were trying to get submitted first, and then we're working on the smaller projects. We're basically working from larger to smaller. So as you know, as we get those reimbursements submitted, that 2 million will
And so
reduce.
of the 8.9 million that we've spent, how much have we received from FEMA?
That that's the 1.3 million
The
that we've received.
applicant cost share? No, that's the,
That's not listed on here. So we've received 1.3 million. I don't think that's listed anywhere in there. Yeah.
And most of the 1.3 million that was received, the smaller projects, the GOSEP's review process is much quicker. So
Right.
they basically almost auto pay those.
Yeah.
And it's anything over
130,000.
130,000 goes to the more formal review, and then anything over 1 million actually goes beyond GOSEP, goes back up to DC for an additional review before it's paid.
so of the, take the 6.8 that we've submitted minus the 1.3 million, is there an average length of time for getting these?
I will say that on one of the larger projects that was submitted well earlier, it was submitted in September. It was for 1.1 million, and we received we signed up for this kind of fast pass thing where you receive 80% of your 90%. So within 2 months of submitting that one, we actually received our 80% portion, and then the rest has to be a full review, and then we'll get the other 10% of that. So I'm hoping that these go just as fast, and we could start seeing portions of those within 2 months. Some of those were submitted in early or mid-January, so next month maybe.
Maybe we need more smaller projects.
Divide
Are
them
you
all
dealing
into-
with the same people at FEMA on all these projects, or are they cut up in
No.
this group?
No, sir.
Short
So
answer, no.
that was something we had hoped for, especially for our loaders, because that's a very specialty piece of equipment. We were hoping that after we taught them everything for the first 2 loaders, that they would also review the unloaders, and that has not been the case. So no, sir. Now, our GOSEP representative is the
Yes,
same.
correct.
I guess our first line of contact
Yeah.
is the same.
Yeah.
And we have one FEMA representative that's the same as well.
Anything else?
Any other questions?
So, one last
Go
one.
ahead.
So of this total estimate of 160 17 million.
Okay.
We've received 1.3 million. Is that a true statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
But you have to
Yes and no.
subtract out the 46
Right.
million in
Okay.
insurance
So-
proceeds from that
Yeah.
right off the bat.
So if we take.
The
make
117
it
minus
easy,
roughly
50 million out of
46,
that, then, so out of basically about
60,
60 million,
roughly.
Yes, ma'am.
90% of 60 million.
That's correct.
Yes, yeah. I'm having to think about it.
Yeah.
But one thing that's important to point out also is that we're only going to get reimbursed once we expend the funds.
Yeah.
So like the cranes that we've ordered, the one that had the 12-month delivery and the 24-month delivery time, we won't get reimbursed until we submit those invoices to GOSEP.
Yeah.
Ricky, is there any time limit on when to initiate those projects before we get reimbursed?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
And so CSRS is helping us stay on top of those time extension requests. GOSEP is submitting some as a state for the entire state for all these disasters. They'll submit some requests to FEMA requesting these extensions, and then we're also handling some, or we're actually doing them in addition, just so that we're double protected.
So basically, if we didn't have cash available to make these hurricane-related expenditures, then we could not access the FEMA
Correct.
money.
We
I mean,
could-
unless we pay for them up front and then submit an invoice and say,
That's right.
pay us back, we do not receive that money.
Right.
Essentially, yes, ma'am. Luckily, that's where our insurance proceeds come in.
Yeah.
Helped us.
But I mean, after that,
Yeah.
because obviously
That's
that
right.
was not sufficient. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Navigation, Shannon?
Yes, sir. In addition to my written report, point out two things. First of all, the geodetic survey from the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration is going to be resurveying the area of the Gulf in and around the outer bar. So we, along with the Harbor Safety Committee and the pilots and the Coast Guard, are going to be making recommendations to them as to what we need, and the Corps of Engineers also. So we can get, these are not navigation charts, but they give an idea of what's out there. It'll mark wrecks. It'll show where the general shoals are, and that sort of thing. And secondly, Port Authority staff will be part of a group of emergency responders meeting with the National Hurricane Center director to talk with him about improving responses for hurricanes and other emergencies. So that's everything I have. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
No questions?
I just want, Channing, there was a lot in the news last week about NOAA issuing this report about sea level rise by 2050, where they moved up the date about this 1 to 2 foot sea level rise. Will there be some effort with navigation regarding how that affects disposal sites and everything else that you always deal with?
Yes, sir. We have been arguing for a long time, unsuccessfully, that when you build marsh or you build disposal sites, you have to take into consideration what not only sea level rise is going to do, but what subsidence is going to do. So that you should build your marsh platform not for a marsh when the material settles today, but when it's what it's going to be like 50 years from now. So far, nobody listens to us, but we are trying to make that point.
Thank you.
Operations, Todd?
Yes, sir. Recently at City Docks, we've unloaded, FMT unloaded 2 lumber shipments totaling about 45,000 cubic meters of lumber. There's 2 more shipments scheduled in the next couple of weeks, so it'll bring a total of about 90,000 cubic meters in about 6 weeks. We unloaded 5 hydrate barges. IFG loaded 2 bulk rough rice vessels, about 40,000 metric tons. We did 3 cargo transfers, about 8,000 tons, and a liquid ship, about 4,600 tons. Coming up, we've got some more cargo transfers and then the lumber for City Docks. At BT1, we loaded a calcine ship and a calcine barge and unloaded about 74,000 tons of barite. Coming up, we've got another calcine vessel and barge, about 10,000 tons. And then we're in the process of unloading 30,000 tons of raw coke for Alcoa. And we have 2 pet coke ships. They're going to be here about the same time as usual. It's going to be about 100,000 tons, one for Phillips and one for Citgo. And then we have 3 rutile vessels. It's about 14,000 tons of rutile for Louisiana pigment. So, do you have any questions?
Questions? Cargo Trade Development, Terrence.
Thank you, Mr. President. We recently hosted a company looking to operate our offshore wind terminal here at our industrial canal property. They had 2 site visits since November. They actually sent their director of all operations from Rhode Island to come visit. They do have a established agreement to already do this on the East Coast. They're looking to do the same thing here in the Gulf Coast. We're going to be on the next issue of the Trade, Industry, and Development magazine, which is a site selection and facility planning magazine. We're going to get an article, 4-page ad, and a 1-year listing on their new website, opening on March 1st. And we have a USDA bid invitation bid for this week. It's only 8,000 tons, but there is about 2,500 tons of rice on it, and it will be April, May delivery if we are successful with that bid.
So we have enough people to meet the demand, labor to meet the demand?
We hope if we would get all 8,000, we'd have issues on the rail side because we only have 2,500 tons of rice. So we'll have about a couple hundred rail cars unloaded. We'll get this cargo. I hope we can meet the demand if we get it.
Any other questions?
These projects, these 4 projects, those are LED projects?
The 4 listed in my report is, but the offshore wind is not. And we also have another project with the Alliance. They're not looking for poor property, but the property they're offering has to have a barge operation within 5 miles. BT1 fits that mold. I'm just waiting on the cargo and what they need to handle before we make a competitive offer.
This project, Bison and project, those are all LED?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, engineering, maintenance, Nick.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Staying on the FEMA conversation, I wanted to speak a little bit more on the email that Mr. Self sent out a little earlier today. Just some issues we've been having, and I say we, it's CSRS and myself and Cameron we've been dealing with basically through the review process on a few of our projects. The first one is our ship unloader number 2, which is our old Coney ship unloader. Really just having difficulty, as I mentioned, Mr. Lorenzi, about the different reviewers. So we thought we had kind of gained some knowledge working with the ones that reviewed our ship loaders, and then when we moved to the ship unloaders, of course, they assigned it to someone different. And everything was going great. Actually, it passed the first 2 review steps, and when it got to the final review point, they basically went back to the engineer's report from Booz Navarre, who said numerous times that we should decommission and just start all over. But they found one part in there where he had basically put a range of a repair cost just to try to help us make the financial decision. And now they're honed in on that. And they say, well, if there's a possibility of repair, why didn't you repair it? So they're trying to push us into doing this 50% cost where they basically repair versus replacement value. And we totally disagree with it. You know, we have our engineer of record saying that he disagrees with it, but they're sticking on that. So we're working through that one. The fear there is that if they hold us to that decision on this one unloader, then they'll do it on the second unloader. And then also we still have the spiral barrier here at City Docks that has yet to be submitted. So we want to make sure we get this decision correct on this one before we move on to those other two. So the next step is we've elevated that to higher up in FEMA review. We're going to have a call and have Boosavar on the call with us, myself, and try to push them past that point. The other big one is Transit Shed 7. This one, as you know, we were well above the 50% calculation on this one. We had an engineer go through and do this analysis for us, did a structural assessment, did a repair cost estimate, well above. The first delay was they wanted us to identify all the codes that we would have to follow to repair the building, even though we weren't going to repair it. We actually got past that, and then now they're trying to hold us to putting a new foundation into this building that we're going to just put back in its place, which already has a foundation. So, and we think their goal there is to, by including a foundation, of course, you're going to drive the repair costs up and throw off our calculations. So we're battling that one right now. We think we've already had the meeting with higher supervisors in FEMA, and we think we haven't passed that point. We're just waiting on him to kind of make his ruling. But this is another project where we've asked Congressman Higgins and other staff to help us, basically try to get them to be reasonable. Very, very similar situation on sheds 16 and 17. As you know, we've awarded, we're doing re-roofs on both of those, which are over 100,000 square feet each. Essentially, those made it past the virtual inspection, because, of course, they still haven't been on site. And their inspectors, on-site virtual inspectors, agreed that the roof should be replaced because of the type of material it is. We have two engineers' reports, one from the manufacturer and one from our local engineer, stating that, yes, full roof replacement should happen. And then when it got to one step in the FEMA review process, the inspector said, well, wait, no. And they pulled up Google Earth and said, well, only this portion's damaged. That's all we want to pay you for. So they're Google Earth engineering it on us, and we're battling that, and we've had numerous calls on that one with their higher-ups. But just wanted to kind of give you an update on what we're dealing with on a daily basis, especially CSRS. They're fighting these battles every day. And those are three big projects that we're asking for help from our congressman and see what they can do to help kind of push these through. On another point, speaking of Shed 7, you guys awarded that contract to Keelan to demolition to demolish the whole building so that we could start handling open berth cargo there. Before we could tear down the building, we had to do an asbestos survey, of course, for our DEQ requirements, and we found asbestos, which none of us expected to happen. So now we're moving on to asbestos remediation. We've been working with subcontractors and Keelan Construction to try to basically quantify that, and we think we're to a point where we have a fairly decent number that I can bring back to you guys next month and get authorization to move forward with the asbestos remediation, which it's actually going to have to work hand in hand with the demo contractor, because it's nothing that they can just pull out ahead of the total demolition. They'll have to do it piece by piece. So yeah, everything's going smoothly.
Remember that question I asked?
That was last month, right? Well, a lot can change in a month. But I'll be happy to answer any other questions.
Do you have a cost estimate of what you've spent on engineering, consulting, analysis for those three projects that you submitted?
I don't have it, but I could definitely get it. I mean, those are pretty
I would like to see
easy
what we've
invoices.
expended.
Sure, just on those three that I mentioned. Absolutely.
What was the rationale, Nick, on wanting to include the foundation on a slab, concrete slab that's not damaged?
Yeah, I think they're buried somewhere deep in their guidelines that they think that since you're doing this calculation, you have to assume that building can be placed anywhere. And so they're saying if you were to build this building somewhere else, like an alternative project, you have to include a foundation for it. And we think that's what their rationale is that buried deep in their regulations somewhere, there's this little requirement that it has to be the all the total building. What would you build? What would this cost if you totally built it somewhere else or repaired it somewhere else?
Well, the flip side of that is if you still meet the above 50% threshold, including that, which you did, now are they gonna allow the money to do a new foundation into the cost estimate?
That's exactly the point that came up from their supervisor that said that doesn't make any sense because then we would owe you more money.
Right.
And they saw that rationale, and that's why we're hoping that this will go away at this point because he made that exact point. He said if you were to do this as an alternative project, we would have to give you that foundation cost. We didn't submit it as an alternative project because we were doing the correct way, but
Right.
that's definitely been brought up.
They don't see that 4-5%.
No, not yet.
Nick, that's a tough fight you're fighting with FEMA, man. I'm gonna be honest with you.
Yes, sir.
We've had a lot of dealings with FEMA. And I guess the thing is, sometimes when you deal with them, you need to go in with your guns loaded. Do you have anybody on the line with you when you speak with them, for a senator or congressman? Somebody that can add a little bit more leverage to your argument with them?
Not a senator or congressman, no, sir. We haven't done that. I'm actually usually the backup to
Yeah.
our CSRS guys.
Yeah.
I'm more of the engineer and owner's rep. So.
Yeah.
We did reach out to Congressman Higgins today, though.
Good.
Yeah.
I mean, because, it's gonna be tough.
Absolutely.
And let me ask this, do they place these bids or these jobs based on the importance of the economic of that position, that's what it does to that area?
Not that
Can
I
I
can
say
tell.
that? It has no bearing on that at all?
Not that we've noticed, no. And that's on that same note, from past experience, we've always been told that state agencies have a little more preference because they're also a state agency.
Yeah.
And there doesn't appear to be that at all, so no. Yeah,
Yeah, call our congressman.
absolutely.
Any other questions for Nick? State lobbyists,
Nothing more than that.
nothing on the federal. Any other matters that properly come before the board? If not, I'll entertain a motion for executive session.
So move. Second.
Mr. Lorenzi moved, Mr. Darvon second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Ayes have it. We'll be going into executive session.